Dust hung low over Pine Hollow Ridge, catching the pale afternoon sun in drifting gold motes that clung to every pine needle and rock face. Amos Larkin wiped the sweat from his brow, leaning forward in his saddle as he scanned the slope below. One of his calves had wandered off during yesterday's storm. No surprise, given the downed fences and spooked herd, but he hadn't expected to find boot tracks beside the little cow's prints. Heavy ones. 3 men, at least, by the looks of it. Claim jumpers. The kind that believed the ridge belonged to them just because someone once scratched their initials into the bark of a ponderosa pine. Amos urged his dun mare down the ridge, keeping low in his saddle. He wasn't a man eager for trouble, but he wasn't the type to shy from it either. Pine Hollow Ridge had fed his father and grandfather before him, and no pack of opportunists was going to run him off. He found the calf near a trickle of a creek, tied to a pine by a length of rope that certainly didn't belong to him. Amos dismounted, crouching low. The calf bawled softly, confused, her hide scraped from being dragged. He reached out to untie her. A gunshot cracked through the pines. Something slammed into his side, hot, burning, like a hammer forged in hell. Amos dropped to one knee behind a fallen log as another shot split the air above his head. His mare screamed and bolted. Somewhere behind the trees, a man howled. There he is. Don't let him crawl off. Amos pressed a hand to his side. Blood seeped through his fingers. Bad. Too bad to fight straight. He forced himself up, stumbling deeper into the forest as bullets chipped bark around him. The terrain shifted, steeper, rockier. He pushed through the brush, vision blurring, ears ringing. The shouts faded, though he couldn't tell if the men had given up or were circling. His boots slipped on loose shale. He tried to catch himself on a boulder, missed, and sprawled against the earth. The world spun, fading at the edges. He crawled a few more feet before his body gave out. The pine boughs above him swayed gently, whispering in the wind. He thought he heard the calf bawling again, then nothing but his own labored breath. He closed his eyes. A shadow passed over him. Not darkness, shade. Something huge blocked the sunlight. A deep, rumbling snort sounded close enough to stir his hair. He forced his eyes open. A horse, no, a mountain on hooves, towered above him. A massive black draft horse, easily 17 hands at least, its feathered legs planted gently beside him. Its breath puffed warm and steady, and its dark eyes regarded him with a curious calm. Then another shadow fell over him. A woman knelt down, though even kneeling, she seemed impossibly tall. She was broad-shouldered beneath her wool coat, her long dark braid resting over one collarbone. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, swept over him with an intensity that felt both frightening and strangely gentle. "Well now," she murmured, her voice low and steady. "You're in a bad way, aren't you?" He blinked, struggling to speak. Who are you?" "Name's Maeve Callahan," she said. "Widow up at Pine Hollow Ridge." Her big hands were surprisingly gentle as she examined his side. "Bullets still in. You'll bleed out if I leave you here." Amos tried to shake his head. "Danger, men. 3 of them. I saw their tracks coming this way." She glanced toward the deeper forest, jaw hard. "I'll handle them if they come too close. For now, you're coming with me." He would have argued, but his tongue felt heavy, and the world spun again. Maeve lifted him as if he weighed no more than an old feed sack. She carefully draped him across the giant horse's back and mounted behind him. The big animal didn't flinch or hesitate, just carried them up the ridge with steady, powerful strides. Amos drifted in and out of consciousness, feeling the woman's arm around him, steadying him, keeping him anchored. The scent of her, pine, wood smoke, and something faintly sweet, drifted into his fading awareness. Once, when the horse scrambled over a rocky ledge, Amos groaned. Maeve tightened her hold. "You stay with me now," she muttered. "Don't you go dying before I get a chance to fix you up." He might have laughed if he had breath. The trail climbed higher, the forest deepening to old-growth pines taller than church spires. At last, the trees parted to reveal a sturdy homestead lodge, log-built, with smoke swirling from the chimney and a corral beside a frozen pond. The place looked strong, lived in, capable of withstanding storms and wolves and anything else the mountains hurled at it. Maeve slid down from the saddle, then lifted Amos as easily as she had before. The horse waited patiently, snorting once before heading toward the corral as if fully knowing the routine. Inside the lodge, warmth hit Amos like a blanket. A fire roared in a stone hearth, and the room smelled of stew and herbs. Maeve laid him on a bed of thick pine fiber blankets, then began cutting away his blood-soaked shirt. "You're lucky I came down to check my traps when I did," she said, working with brisk expertise. "Lucky, or stubborn enough to refuse dying proper." He managed a weak smile. "Stubborn, mostly." She snorted. "Figured." She cleaned the wound, her expression tightening only slightly when he hissed through his teeth. Her hands were deft and steady, and for a moment he wondered how many times she'd done this. For herself, for her late husband, for wandering strangers she found between the pines. "You live up here alone?" he managed to ask. Her jaw shifted, but she didn't look away from her work. "Been alone 2 winters now," she said quietly. "My husband and I used to run this ridge together. After he passed, the mountain gets quiet, but she doesn't stop needing tending." Amos wanted to say something, condolence, maybe, but the words drifted away. The firelight flickered on the walls, and the warmth lulled him. Maeve fixed the bandage tight against his side, her fingers brushing his skin only briefly. "You'll be safe here," she said. "No one bothers Pine Hollow Ridge without my knowing." He believed her. He drifted into sleep with the sound of her voice lingering in the air like a promise. Amos woke to the crackle of the hearth and the faint scent of pine resin simmering in a clay pot somewhere nearby. His side throbbed in an angry rhythm that told him he was still alive, unpleasant proof, but proof nonetheless. When he tried to sit up, a firm, impossibly strong hand landed on his shoulder and guided him gently back down. "Easy," Maeve murmured. "You tear those stitches, and I'll have words for you." He blinked the haze from his eyes. She was sitting beside him, a steaming mug cupped in her hands. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows, catching in the strands of her braid like threads of bronze. She offered him the mug. "Drink. Elderberry and spruce. Helps keep fever off." He accepted it with shaking hands, surprised when the steam alone soothed his chest. She watched him with that same intense, assessing gaze he'd first seen in the forest, measuring him, weighing whether he'd survive, or perhaps something more he couldn't quite name. "How long was I out?" he asked. "Near half a day." She checked the bandage at his side before he could protest. The bleeding slowed. "You're healing better than I expected." "Thanks to you," he said. Maeve shrugged, though a faint color touched her cheeks. "A body helps where they can. That's how ridge folk survive." Her tone carried a shadow of something. Memory, maybe. He set the mug aside with care. "You mentioned your husband yesterday," he said softly. "You lost him in these mountains?" Her eyes lingered on the fire for a long moment. He and I ran the trap lines together for near 10 years. Strongest man I ever knew." She paused. "A winter storm rolled in faster than we could make shelter. He slipped on an ice shelf, broke through the ridge and fell into the ravine." She tapped her finger once against her thigh. "Horse brought me home, but he couldn't bring him." Amos swallowed. "I'm sorry." She nodded once, as though accepting the words without needing them. "I stayed. Thought about leaving. Thought about selling the place. But the ridge, it's in my bones. And someone had to keep it from vultures." "Claim jumpers," he guessed. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "They've been circling since the day the lanterns went out in my window. First polite questions. Then trespassing. Now gunshots in the woods." Her gaze hardened, though her voice remained even. "The mountain may be wide, but trouble always finds its way up. I'm sorry I dragged more of it to your doorstep." She shook her head. "You didn't drag them. They were already sniffing around. You just ran into them before I did." She rose to her full impressive height. "You need food. Your skin and bone." Amos tried not to stare as she moved, graceful despite her size, with a quiet strength that seemed carved from the same pines surrounding the cabin. When she returned with a bowl of venison stew, he couldn't remember the last time he'd smelled something so heavenly. "If you're hungry for seconds," she said, "that pot's always on." "I think I might be," he admitted. A smile ghosted across her lips, the first he'd seen. Soft, warm, and quick as a flicker. He felt absurdly proud of earning it. The morning passed slow. Maeve went about her chores, though she kept glancing toward the tree line beyond the window. Amos dozed, waking occasionally to the sound of her sharpening tools, checking the traps she'd hung to dry, or humming softly as she ground herbs in a mortar. Every movement was sure, practiced. When noon came, she stepped inside holding a rifle. "Tracks," she said simply. Amos pushed himself upright. "Men. 3. Same boot size. Heading toward the trail below the lodge." She loaded the rifle with smooth, familiar motions. "Probably expecting you rolled off somewhere and died." Amos reached for his coat, wincing sharply. "I can help." "You can barely stand," Maeve said. "If you rush out there bleeding, you'll just make more work for me. But I can't hide in your house while you face them alone." Her eyes softened, though her posture didn't. "Ridge folk look after their own. And for now, you're under my roof. Which makes you my responsibility." Amos stared up at her. There was no arrogance in her tone, just truth. Simple, mountain-forged truth. He swallowed, then nodded once. "What do you want me to do?" "Stay inside. Bolt the door. If something happens, take my husband's old rifle off the mantel." She glanced to it briefly. "It's already loaded." He didn't like it, but he respected her enough not to argue. Maeve stepped out into the pale afternoon light, her long shadow stretching across the snow-stitched clearing. The enormous draft horse, Cole, stood waiting in the corral, stamping one massive hoof. Maeve stroked his nose, whispered something, then set off into the pines with silent purpose. Amos tried to wait. Truly, he did. But every crack of distance would had him clenching his jaw. Every minute that ticked by felt like a held breath. After 20 agonizing minutes, he stood, bracing against the wall. He grabbed the rifle from the mantel. Outside, the cold slapped him instantly, but his stubborn streak burned hotter than the wind. He followed her tracks along the ridge, large, confident steps that told him she wasn't stalking so much as warning the woods that she knew what lurked in them. He found her not far down the trail. Maeve stood behind a fallen pine, rifle propped, her eyes locked on a clearing below. Amos crouched beside her, breath catching from pain and surprise. The claim jumpers were there, 3 men, rough and desperate-looking, pacing around the creek like wolves scenting a carcass. "Thought I told you to stay put," she murmured. "Thought you might need an extra gun," he whispered. She gave him a sideways look, half exasperation, half grudging respect. "You're a fool. Never said otherwise. You can't aim straight in that condition." "Maybe not. But I can shout loud enough to distract." She huffed something that might have been a laugh if the moment weren't so tense. Then her expression sharpened. "They're searching for you," she said. "If they find this trail, they'll find the lodge. Then we stop them here." Together, they watched as the men stepped closer to the slope, too close. Maeve rose a breath at a time, steady as sunrise. Then, with a voice that echoed off the ridge, she called, "That's far enough, boys." The claim jumpers froze. All 3 turned to face the towering widow of Pine Hollow Ridge. The 3 men blinked, disbelief etched across their rough faces. The woman standing before them was immense, like a mountain carved from living flesh, and the rifle in her hands was as steady as if it were an extension of her arm. Her eyes, sharp and dark, scanned them in a way that made each man feel exposed down to his boots. "You lost something in the woods?" the tallest one drawled, voice uneven. "Or just lookin' for trouble?" Maeve's lips curved in a faint, chilling smile. "I'm lookin' for folks who think they can steal from Pine Hollow Ridge without consequence. You boys fell into that category." The tallest man's hand twitched toward his belt, but a single tilt of her head made him pause. The other two looked uneasy, their own guns dangling uselessly in their grips. Amos shifted beside her, holding the old rifle as best he could. Pain stabbed through his side with every movement, but adrenaline lent him courage. He glanced at Maeve. Her hand rested lightly on the trigger, her stance unwavering. He had never seen a woman like her. Not in town, not in any bar, not even in the fading portraits of mountain wives and daughters his father had shown him. She was strength, wrath, and grace all rolled into one towering figure. And right now, she was his lifeline. "You might want to leave," Amos muttered through gritted teeth. "Or, things get ugly." Maeve's gaze flicked to him for a heartbeat, then back to the claim jumpers. "I don't make idle threats. Leave now, or I'll send you back down the ridge on a stretcher, just like him." Her eyes sharpened toward Amos, a silent acknowledgment that she'd saved him, and now, together, they were ready. The tallest man cursed under his breath, and the others shifted uneasily. Finally, the one who had been pacing spoke. "Fine. We ain't looking for a fight with that," he gestured vaguely at Maeve. "Or you." He cast a wary glance at Amos. "But you watch your back, boy." Maeve's rifle didn't waver. She didn't flinch. "Go. And don't come back." The men exchanged glances. Pride, fear, and stubbornness warred on their faces. But Maeve didn't give them the luxury of doubt. She remained unmoving, an unspoken wall of iron. Slowly, grumbling, they began retreating down the slope, boots crunching over fallen pine needles and loose stones. Their departure echoed through the hollow like a retreating storm. Amos exhaled sharply, gripping the rifle a little too tightly. Guess that worked." Maeve lowered the rifle, her posture easing only slightly. "You're lucky I was here. The woods aren't kind to the foolish." She glanced at him, her expression softening, though the fierceness lingered in her eyes. "You, running through the forest half dead, that was foolish." "I can't argue with that," he admitted, wincing as he leaned on the rifle for support. Maeve moved beside him, inspecting the small scrapes and bruises that had gone unnoticed in the chaos. "You'll live. And someday, you might even learn to pick better routes." Amos smiled faintly, though pain made it grim. "I'll hold you to that." For a long while, they trudged back to the lodge in silence, side by side. The forest around them seemed calmer, almost reverent, as if it acknowledged that the ridge had been defended by its rightful keeper. Amos noticed the way Maeve moved, her strength seeming limitless, yet tempered by care and experience. Each step was measured, deliberate, as though she was teaching him something without words: survival, courage, and the quiet bond that forms in shared danger. When they reached the lodge, Maeve guided him back inside, helping him to sit by the fire. Cole, the enormous draft horse, waited patiently in the corral, as if proud of the role he had played in this strange alliance. "You'll be safe here for the night," Maeve said, tending once more to his wound. "Tomorrow, we'll make sure the ridge is secure, and I'll see you properly fed." Amos watched her, realizing just how much he relied on her presence, not just for survival, but for a strange comfort he hadn't felt in years. The mountains, once lonely and threatening, suddenly felt like a place he could belong. And it wasn't just the lodge, or the safety, or even the fire. It was Maeve, the woman who had saved him, guided him, and faced danger head-on without flinching. "Thank you," he said quietly. Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "No thanks needed. You'd do the same for someone in my position." He shook his head. "Not like you. Not even close." A faint smile touched her lips again, and Amos felt a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the fire. Night fell, but Amos felt no fear. The ridge was quiet now, snow settling gently over the pines, moonlight spilling silver across the frozen pond. Maeve checked the locks, the traps, and then settled near the fire, keeping a vigilant watch. Amos lay back on the blankets, feeling the steady presence of her and the mountain around them. The next morning, they rose early. Amos was stronger, his side still sore, but his body less burdened by pain. Maeve handed him a bundle of supplies, including his old boots, a rifle, and a leather satchel. Today, they would confront the claim jumpers properly. Not with reckless courage, but with preparation, strategy, and a force that the ridge itself seemed to lend them. They tracked the men to the edge of a narrow canyon, where the claim jumpers were attempting to stake their false claim. Maeve led Amos to a concealed vantage point, teaching him how to move silently among the pines, how to read the shadows, how to trust instinct over eyes alone. Amos listened and learned, realizing that his rescuer was not only strong and brave but wise in ways that only the mountains could teach. When the moment came, Maeve and Amos acted in unison. She emerged first, towering and commanding, while he flanked from the side, steadying himself with every step. The claim jumpers froze, and this time there was no bluff, no hesitation. "You thought you could take what isn't yours," Maeve said, voice ringing with authority. "Now you'll pay for it, or leave, and leave the ridge in peace." This time, there was no argument. The men fled, casting anxious glances back at the widow of Pine Hollow Ridge and the rancher she had saved. Amos felt a surge of respect and admiration for her, not just for her strength, but for the way she wielded it, combining force with calm judgment. He realized, with an unexpected thrill, that he wanted to stay. Not just on the ridge, but near her, in the way one stays close to someone who has become a cornerstone of life itself. When the men were gone for good, Maeve and Amos returned to the lodge, riding side by side. The giant draft horse moved with a steady rhythm beneath them, a reminder of the bond between human and animal, protector and protected. Inside, the cabin seemed warmer, brighter somehow, not just because of the fire, but because a strange, unspoken connection had formed between them. Amos looked at Maeve as she tended the fire. "Guess I owe you more than one thanks." "You already said that," she replied, though a playful glint appeared in her eyes. "Besides, you might have earned a little more than gratitude." He smiled, pain and pride mingling in his expression. "Then I'll take whatever it is you're offering." Maeve shook her head, laughter softening the edges of her stern features. "Mountain folk don't deal in gifts, Amos. But you're welcome to stay. That's as close as it gets." And so, the ridge settled into silence once more, the kind of quiet only mountains know, the kind that promises safety, resilience, and unexpected bonds. Amos felt the truth of her words sink in. He had been lost, almost gone, and yet here he was, stronger and alive, standing beside the widow of Pine Hollow Ridge, ready to face whatever storms might come next. The sun set behind the pines, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Amos realized that, for the first time in years, the mountains didn't feel lonely. And neither did he.